right. All right, John's here finally. A little technical difficulty. Brenda, can you hear me okay?
Can you hear me okay?
All right. I'm not sure if I heard you. You say it again. Am I in?
Hey, John, can you hear us?
Perfect. All right. Thank you.
Good evening.
Do we still need again, I'm just having technical difficulties, but do we still need a minute for others, or are we good to go?
We could probably use a minute or two.
Great.
Russell just came in, and looks like we're still down a couple people.
This is Councilman Ward. I'm here. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Oh.
Does this work?
I heard something.
Yeah, so we definitely have a quorum, so we can get going if you'd like, Chair.
Great. All right. Very good. Good evening, everybody. I will call the July 9th meeting of the Water and Sewer Board to order. Brenda, if you could take roll for us, that would really kick us off well.
Okay. Board Member Bresky.
Present.
Board Member Freeman.
Present.
Board Member Jolie.
Present.
Board Member Mercier.
Present.
Board Member Riley. Ridley. Council Member Russell. Do you want to say present again, Ridley?
Present.
Thank you. Board Member Russell.
Present.
Council Member Ward. Mayor Sierra.
Present and on my way to City Hall.
Oh, great. Okay. Mayor Sierra. Vice Chair Habernick. Chair Moore.
Present. All right. Sounds like we do have a quorum. So wonderful. Let's move on to the approval of the minutes from the July 11th meeting. Can I get a motion to approve? June 11th? I'm not sure what I said.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Second.
All right. Any comments or corrections? All right. All in favor, please say aye.
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 All right.
Aye.
All right. Minutes are approved. Moving on to the public forum. Brenda, do we have anyone from the public that wishes to speak with us tonight?
No, we do not.
Okay. Moving on then to new business items. Item 5A. And I believe Deputy City Attorney Victoria McDermott will take it.
Yes, that's correct, Chair Moore. Good evening. I'm Deputy City Attorney Victoria McDermott. I'm here to present tonight on the City Ditch License Agreement and Consent to Assignment. Next slide. So the City of Englewood was approached by property owners Cora Enterprises LLC regarding a matter concerning their property at 3650 South Cherokee Street. Cora owns an apartment complex in the city, and their parcel is intersected by the city ditch. Under several agreements with the city, Cora agreed to pipe portions of the city ditch and received permission to install a parking lot over it. Cora is now in the process of selling their property. During this process, a title discrepancy has been identified regarding the ownership of the parking lot area. After a thorough review by our office and utility staff, it's been determined that the city holds a right-of-way and easement for the city ditch area. Next slide. So to assist in resolving this title discrepancy, our office, in collaboration with the Utilities Water Rights Council, prepared a city ditch license agreement. This agreement allows Cora to continue using the parking lot area while clearly defining the city's rights to operate, maintain, or relocate the city ditch. It specifies that no additional construction or use over the city ditch is permitted without the city's consent, and any assignment of the license requires the city's written approval. Next slide. So additionally, we also have a consent agreement to allow the assignment of this license agreement to the prospective buyers of this property. And this will ensure that the new owners have the same rights and obligations as Cora, and that the city continues to retain and maintain its own rights as well. So with that, I can open up to any questions. Representatives from Cora are here if there are any questions for them.
Do we have any questions? I don't see any hands raised at this point. All right, then if there are no questions, I'll welcome a motion to move item 5A as written.
I'll move.
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, motion carries. Next up, item 5B. I believe, Sarah, you'll take it.
Yes, I will. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Sarah Stone, Deputy Director for Business Solutions and Engineering. So this item tonight is the 2024 Budget Supplemental Appropriation Request. This is for the sewer fund. So in 2023, SBR had a capital budget of about $14.1 million. They ended up spending about $12.3 million, leaving about $1.8 million remaining. This is for their operations complex building, where they've requested to have a budget supplemental in order to move that $1.8 million from 2023 into 2024. So what that looks like for the city of Englewood and city of Littleton is that we would split that 50-50, and that's according to the joint use agreement that we split all capital costs in half between the two cities. So each city would approve or consider a supplemental request of $900,000 for 2024. So what that means for the total capital budget for SPR in 2024 is it would go from 17.9 to 19.7, and that total supplemental is 1.8 million. So this was presented at the June 27th meeting for the SPR Supervisory Committee, and it was approved at that time. So we are requesting an appropriation as well. The budget that was in 2023 for SPR, that was already included in the fund balance, consideration for the sewer enterprise fund. So really it's just moving that money and appropriating it for 2024. So with that, I'll open up for any questions.
Do we have any?
Sure.
Go ahead.
I'm not clear, is this because of cost overruns on the construction of the new building?
It is not. It is due to the construction timing of what happened in 2023. So it's moving. I'll let Peter answer. He's more familiar with the project.
This is all a timing issue. So when we set the budget in 2023, we predicted how much of the construction we'd expect to be done by the end of 2023. It's essentially $1.8 million behind schedule that we need to move into 2024, which is causing our predicted 2024 capital budget to need to be increased by the amount that should have been spent in 2023. So there's no new money here. It's just moving it from 23 to 24.
Okay, so basically just an accounting adjustment.
It's a timing thing.
Thank you.
And just kind of curiosity, is our approval or ultimately city council's approval contingent on Littleton also approving?
Yeah, so at SPR, my staff over there is also working with the finance director at City of Littleton to ensure that this goes through their process from a budget appropriations perspective, and they are They're also moving this through so that the full 1.8 million moves into the 2024 budget.
Thank you. Any further questions? All right, seeing none, can I get a motion to approve item 5B as written?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, motion carries. Moving on to 5C. Utilities engineer Kim Ramuno, will take it, I believe.
Oh, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Kimberly Ramuno, and I'm an engineer with Utilities Department. And this is an item for the contract renewal for the Solids Handling Improvements Project. So the water treatment process, throughout the water treatment process, solids and particulate matter are removed from the raw water and are then sent to and collected in a 14 million gallon reservoir located adjacent to the water treatment process called the South Reservoir. From the South Reservoir, solids are then seasonally dredged and dewatered using a belt filter press to remove the excess water from the solids. This system is located in a building just south of the reservoir. There's a conveyance system that moves the solids out of the building, and they are then stored in a dry bed where they are further dried through evaporation before being hauled to a local landfill for final disposal. The belt filter press is, as some of you know, a repurposed juice press and operates in a very similar fashion to where the excess water is pressed out of the solids. The press is aging and unable to keep up with the amount of solids generated in the water treatment plant throughout the year. As a result, the South Reservoir has been accumulating solids for many years. Part of the water from the South Reservoir decants to our raw water in the North Reservoir. The water from the decant then short circuits back into the plant intake along that south bank of the North Reservoir. Through investigation with our operations team over the last year and a half, this decant stream has been identified as a source of taste and odor issues in our finished water. To address this, we've been working on a solids handling improvements project, which will replace the belt press with a high-capacity centrifuge. This will be able to keep up with our annual solids loading. The centrifuge has also been identified as a long lead item and was ordered earlier this year in January. Preliminary design for the improvements project was completed in April. The original design contract included evaluating solids loading for our current treatment process operations as well as future operations. This allowed for appropriate sizing of the centrifuge. The contract also included assistance with centrifuge procurement and 30% design as well as starting specifications for ancillary equipment. Today, we're seeking approval for a contract renewal for final design of the Solids Handling Improvements Project. This will further develop drawings and specifications to proceed into construction. These construction specifications will be centered around the new centrifuge and will include a new solids feed pump as well as conveyance system. Our recommendation is to renew our professional service agreement for final design with Hazen and Sawyer. Hazen was competitively selected for preliminary design in July 2023. Final design will be completed in early 2025, at which time we anticipate bringing forward a construction contract for approval. The final design contract amount is $239,730 with a contingency amount of $23,973 for a total contract authorization of $266,703. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
I'm not seeing any, not a very inquisitive group tonight. All right, if there are no questions, can I get a motion for item 5C as written?
I move the motion.
Thank you, Marjan.
Yes.
Wonderful. All right, one more chance to have further discussion. All right, hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? All right, motion carries. We have no old business tonight, so we'll go to staff's choice. Peter, is this you?
Trudy Peepgrass is going to present this one.
Thank you. I am Trudy Peepgrass. I am from Procurement, and thank you for having me. In May, at the May 6th City Council meeting, they approved amendments to the City Municipal Code updating the procurement policy. And what that entailed was non-budgeted contracts over greater than $125,000 require council approval, and budgeted contracts greater than $250,000 require council approval. This is different from today. It was increased from $100,000 to $250,000, and staff is requesting, they want to continue with what City Council is doing, and so they would like to bring to Water Sewer Board budgeted contracts of $250,000 and greater, and then non-budgeted contracts at $125,000, and then any other items requiring ordinance or resolution. And with that, I will open it up to questions.
I'm sorry, can you put that screen back up for a second? A chance to digest it a little better. So can we clarify relative to today? Help me out with an example again. What would be the difference between the way things are today versus tomorrow under this?
Currently, anything greater than $100,000 comes to Water Sewer Board for approval and then recommended to council after that. The new changes are anything that is budgeted would increase to $250,000 before it comes to Water Sewer Board and then goes to council. And if it is non-budgeted through the annual budget process, then that increases to $125,000. It comes to Water Sewer Board and then on to council.
So am I getting it right? If it's a budgeted item for $200,000, it does not come to the Water Sewer Board or to council at all.
That is correct.
Is that right? Okay. All right. Any questions?
I have one. Was there any pushback from council on this change?
There were questions answered. We had multiple study sessions and whatnot. The $125,000 for non-budgeted was a CPI increase, so it was from $100,000 to $125,000 based on CPI for the last 5 years since it was reviewed prior. And then the $250,000 was due to economies of scale and increasing, project costs and whatnot. But overall, there was minimal questions with it.
So essentially what we're doing is we're creating alignment between the recommendation that the board makes to council with the approval levels that council just approved. So this is just creating that alignment with our process, with their process, so that as you recommend contracts, they're consistent with what we would be now sending to council.
Can I ask a question? So does that mean these decisions are now administrative? We still have to follow the same, or staff still has to follow the same procurement by requesting bids on things but it becomes administrative rather than approved by council?
That is correct. The procurement policy for the process did not change. The thresholds changed. So the process for solicitations, that increased from 50,000 to 125, but it's still that process and we require quotes under that. So that has not changed, and that goes through the same workflow approval process. The dollar amounts just increased.
So does that also mean that the board, the Water and Sewer Board and council will see these things only at the time the budget is approved?
Less than 250,000, correct.
Okay.
So recognizing that this shifts to more administrative approval. So as a director and as City Manager Lewis in our approval range. So first thing is this is more consistent with the approval level that I already have at South Platte Renew. My approval level there is 100,000. So all contracts under 100,000 have been under my approval for the last 4 years. So this creates more alignment there. The second thing is we are, and Sarah and I just talked about this morning. So we have a very disciplined process around what your question is around procurement process. And every single contract that's $5,000 or more has a memo associated with it that has a background, has a what steps did we take? Did we solicit for quotes? Did we ask for 3 bids? Did we send it out for a full RFP? Did we do an invitation to bid? Did we do an optimal source? That is documented in every one of those memos. So in theory, you could go back 3 years from now, 3 years ago, pick out a contract that was $50,000. You could pull up a memo and you could read the rationale for why the purchase was made, how the purchase was made, how the procurement was made, and then that was signed off. That would have been signed off by me since 2020 for SPR or for Englewood Utilities, and since 2018 for SPR. And that process will not change because as much as anything, I want that transparency in the process in case there is that question.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that.
Marjan, you've got your hand raised.
Thank you, John. Member Russell actually asked my question, so I appreciate that.
Okay.
I had a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so whenever you say contracts, does this mean any and all contracts? So there are revenue contracts, leases, your regular sort of expense contracts. So is this all contracts? So if a lease comes up that the Water and Sewer Board would potentially look at, will that still come to us regardless of the dollar amount? Or does this apply to all contracts?
So an example of a lease, we would adopt that by city ordinance. So yes, that would still come to the Water Sewer Board.
Regardless of the dollar amount?
Regardless of the dollar amount, because it would go on to council for approval
Okay, so
as well.
this really is just like an expense contract that we're talking about here. Okay.
Additionally, for SPR, that is actually, for South Platte Renew, one of the items that we still bring through the 2 councils is anything related to property and land leases. So we have the property out east, that's the farm leases. If there are changes to those leases, we will bring them to both city councils to get both cities to make that approval because it's a land use issue.
I'll recognize myself for a question. Peter, I'll probably direct this at you, just picking on something you were saying. Is there a level of contract today that requires board approval but doesn't require council approval? I'm trying to make sure I'm teasing out, are we just moving up as council moves up, or are we closing a gap that exists that exists today where, again, whatever. Is my question clear?
It's the latter. So we are moving to be consistent with the change in council approvals. And so since the board makes recommendation to council on contracts that they would have a purview over approving, which now those numbers move to 125 for non-budgeted and 250 for budgeted, we would translate that down to the Water and Sewer Board to make the recommendation to council, and anything below those thresholds would then become administrative through myself as the director or City Manager Lewis.
So we're, if council had previously set us up where, we were approved, it only came to them at high levels, but we were approving, somewhere halfway lower. We're not turning around in this case and saying, changing what council's looking to us for, because again, we're just moving up to keep with them. So let me clarify this. Is this what are we changing to make this happen?
So
We're not changing our charter.
Yeah, so we're changing our internal process of what we bring to the board to recommend to approval to council. So up to this point, we have brought everything that's over $100,000 to this board to recommend approval to council. We are now changing that to 125 for non-budgeted, 250 for budgeted, because that's what would be recommended to approval by council. Anything below that would be considered administrative based on this policy change.
Are we updating a prior water and sewer board action? Or does this not, where does the existing guidance exist? So I'm just kind of curious, are we amending something, or are we just the board, is this something we want the board to do its own motion on?
So Chair Moore, this is Deputy City Attorney Victoria McDermott. There's nothing that is being amended in the code, or certainly not in charter. Bringing agreements of this nature to the Water Sewer Board for their approval and recommendation to council has been based off of interpretations of the powers and duties of the Water and Sewer Board.
So did we previously approve the lower limits?
Previously,
I just feel like there's something we're probably updating. I'm just trying to tease that out. I like where we're going. I'm just trying to make sure I understand how it gets reflected.
I think it's just based on the historic practice, and my understanding is that we wouldn't want to be making a change that wasn't discussed with the members of this board.
So when we talked about this a few years ago, when we were looking at, what were the things that were brought to the board and what weren't. And so essentially what one of the board purposes and functions is to take any contract that would require approval from the council to first go through this board for a recommendation for approval. And so because the contracts that would go to council for approval change because the numbers change, the process is still the same. So we don't have to change a number on the board perspective. We don't change anything from a board process perspective. We just align those amounts that we would bring to you with what is already in code, which is your recommendation to council because it's a council action. That's why there wouldn't be a change to anything.
So we're just providing our concurrence with that, and basically that interpretation is the end result.
Yeah, well, I think we've been operating under that interpretation for the last several years, and so what we're informing the board that you're going to see some contract. You're gonna not see some contracts that you may have seen in the past because they're no longer needing recommendation to council approval because they will be approved administratively.
Okay. Then let me ask the board. As I understand it, we're they're letting us know that this is the way this just aligns with the current process. This is the impact from the change. No action is needed for the board. But if there is any concerns or disagreement from the board, I think now is the time to express it. Otherwise, I don't think we'll have a explicit motion on this.
Can I ask
Go ahead,
another
Marjan.
question?
Let me recognize Marjan, and then I think Rita, that was you. I'll do you
Yes.
next.
Thank you.
Marjan, you're on mute, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I unmuted it. Since this is not part of the budget, I see this is that decisions that as administrative decisions. Is there a cap on that? I mean, what would be like the cap on let's say there are 20 scenarios comes and they're not budgeted for, and then administrative approves of it, and then here it affects our budget, and the board has no they cannot put in their opinion. So how does that? Is there a cap?
Well, so let me clarify. So they is us. So they is me as the director and staff that helps me figure out this determination. So in our budgets, we have we have specific line items that budget for things that we know we are going to be spending money on. Within those line items are contracts that align with that budget line item that would be something that would, if it fell under a budgeted line item and as a budgeted process that we talked about with the board through the budget process, we would follow this process and execute that contract if it was under 250. If our interpretation was, well, this wasn't really budgeted for, based on what our sense is, looking at the budget and what we assumed was in the budget, we would then use the 125 threshold to then bring it to council, which is to this board for recommendation for approval to council, which is very similar to the 100,000 limit that it is today, that it was last week before this changed. And so our approach would be to be sure that whatever we are administratively approving aligns with the spirit and purpose of what this change council made was, to make sure that we are not going outside what was assumed with these parameters of 125 and 250. And so there is some interpretation to it. What I can tell you is that if we have a question on the interpretation, we're likely going to default to we're going to default to the more conservative interpretation, because it serves us nothing to, start approving things that are outside what council intended out of this policy, if that makes sense.
What my concern is that it's not what is the current administrative or the employees or yourself. What I'm thinking is that what the decision we're making today, could it possibly have a monumental effect on the future if it's not considered properly? Like, for instance, if let's say they take a project and then they fragment it, and then through that fragmentation they approve every chunk of it, and then the city has no, the people have no opportunity to reject that. Is that a possibility?
That's considered what's called split purchasing, which is a policy that we don't do from a procurement perspective. That's something I think Trudy could get into more details on. Again, I would just want to reiterate, they is me and city manager as it relates to who would be making these approvals. This is why when we introduced this topic, that I reiterated the $5,000 and up has a memo explaining exactly how we made our rationale, how we made our decision. So if anybody wanted to go back and say, why did this get approved at the administrative level versus getting approved at the council level, and that approval aligns with this change. So there's this change at a council level. So there's no change at the board level, because the board is still recommending approval for contracts that would go to council for approval. So there's no change at the board level in terms of the board process. What's changing is the council contract levels that were approved by council to move to 125 for non-budgeted, which is basically essentially moving the 100 to 125, and adding this new approach of, if it's budgeted, the council and boards have already seen it through the budget process, and it's at 250, that it doesn't have to then come back through this whole process again, because it's already been considered through that budget process. So at a board level, nothing is actually changing from a process perspective. What's changing is those limits at the council level. So there isn't the reason why there's no question of approval from the board perspective is because this is a council decision that's already been made. We're just informing the board of what that implication, that process change is to the board. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir, it does. Thank you for explaining to me. I appreciate that.
Sure. Thank you for the questions.
And Rita, if you don't mind, let me ask Peter a clarifying question. Peter, I get the 100 to 125 number. But you just said something I wanted to confirm. Today, if there's a budgeted item, call it at the $200,000 level, is that something you would be bringing to council today? That would not be something you'd bring, I'm sorry, not to council, to this board. It would be something you'd do tomorrow, but are you saying you're adding that budgeted versus non-budgeted distinction here?
We aren't. Council added that budgeted versus non-budgeted distinction when they made these
Thank you.
changes. And so when council made these changes, the charge is to recommend approval of items that would be presented before council for consideration and approval. So if it's under 250 on a budgeted contract, it wouldn't go to council for consideration and approval because it fits this new policy, which means it wouldn't go to this board because the board wouldn't be recommending to the council because the policy already addresses it. Does that make sense? That's the new piece here. It used to be just 100,000, all contracts over 100,000 would come through this board and go to council. The new piece is it's 125 for non-budgeted contracts, which are newer things that weren't considered during the budget process. But there's a lot of things that we know that we're budgeting for throughout the course of the year that are 250. And at that point in time, through the budget process, you would have seen that we're spending, money on MCCs and spending money on valves and things like that. So that's the new piece of this process.
So I'll ask, I have a question for council. Maybe Steve and Rita might have some insight for us, but the question I would ask council is, are you comfortable that between 125 and 250,000 for a budgeted item, while council has decided it doesn't need to look at it, is there any reason at that level between 125 and 250 they would be wanting the Water and Sewer Board to apply a little more scrutiny? That's just the question that comes to my mind. But with that, I'll Reed, I know you already had a question or comment you wanted to make, I believe.
I do. I would almost let Councilmember Ward respond to your question first.
Okay.
Thank you. I was going to start because I think I'm much more comfortable with this process than Member Russell is. I don't want to speak for her, but based on the way the council discussion and vote went on this, that's one of the takeaways. I'll say overall, I had a little heartburn myself about this change when I was examining it, but we were presented with comparables from other nearby municipalities. And this is very in line with what the rest of the Denver metro area does. There are some variances, but the reality is we were starting to get a little bogged down in this has to go to council. So it has to pass through three sets of hands before it gets to council. Then council has to get it and do whatever they want to do with it and then pass it on back. And the timeline for that is, sometimes a month, 45 days. It just made it more difficult to nimbly execute routine contracts. And that's the goal here is we budget for things and we spend that money that we already budgeted and we do it deliberately under the procurement rules with the sets of controls that are already in place that seem to be working effectively on an annual basis. And this provides the ability for us to move more quickly and efficiently and manage our time better.
Thank you.
Actually, I want to ask my question first. So would these changes change anything in tonight's agenda?
I don't believe they would because I think our contract was it the total contract? 263, so it would have come to you.
Okay. Councilmember Ward is correct. I do have some questions regarding this because now even the discussion tonight has been very helpful to me in the fact that we don't really look at budget items. We look at how much is being budgeted. And sometimes those contracts change. And so I think things are going to be left out of purview of the public. And I agree with Marjan's question. And so I do have heartburn over this to a certain extent, in the fact that I feel like council is being left out on some things. I agree with Councilmember Ward. I don't like us to get bogged down, but I'm concerned that council's job is checks and balances and fiduciary responsibility. We're being X'd out of that to a certain level at this point. And I think it would bog down also if council members started asking questions too. I would hope that as this moves forward, the council would pay attention and decide whether we need to move back some. So it has been approved by council. That's where we're at right now, and I'm okay with that, but I do think that we need to be careful. So, thank you.
Council members, thank you both. Let me, and Marjan, I recognize your hand in a moment. While the council made its decision about when it's getting involved, council can provide, whether or not that also means the water and sewer board's review also goes away, could be a second question. Councilmember Russell, that it could be a scenario where, to ease your concerns, you're still asking, well, while I'm not going to see it at the council level, I know it's being seen at the board level. So that's what I guess I still feel, again, I'll put it out there. I think where I respect, I understand the conclusions being reached so far. I think I would reach back to council and say, barring input from you at the council level, we're going to follow your lead and not be looking at these things, but it is absolutely your choice to say that you would still prefer that the board look at anything between 125 and 250.
Yeah, John, I just wanted to add to that. I'm guessing based on how council moved forward here, even if we were to review anything between that 125 and 250, there would be no mechanism to go back to council whether or not we agreed or disagreed as a board with that decision. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. As currently, as the powers and duties of the board are currently defined in charter and municipal code. However, if it were council's direction, or if there was a direction to amend municipal code to align with a different process, that would then change how the city would operate.
Thank you. Let me recognize Marjan.
And thank you, Chair. I just was wondering, Member Ward mentioned that this would be like a lot of routine charges. So that raised a question in my mind that if it's routine, then it should be part of the budget. If it's not routine, then it should be something that is a surprise or an emergency. So then that shouldn't be something that happens all the time. So I think the public have to be able to access this, because to me, considering that doesn't have a cap either, this could be going out of control. I mean, I'm talking about maybe 5 years down the road with all these regulations, and you look at now, CDC is asking for that. Now EPA is asking for that. Now this is asking for that. Now public have no opinion of what's happening because it follows through this. So to me, I don't like this idea. I personally think that we should. I think the members of the water board need to at least look at it, and then of course, if it's something that is budgeted, and then it can go to the council and it could be looked at even further. So, but how much does it take for people to actually discuss this? 5-10 minutes. That's the act of service that we show up for. So I'm personally against it. I just wanted to say that.
So, Marjan, just to clarify, I mean, we already, just making sure we're on the same page, anything below 100,000 is already we're not seeing under today's rules. Okay.
So this is Trudy. I just want to add a little bit bigger picture for this. As far as the budgeted versus non-budgeted, for the city last year in 2023, there would have only been one contract that was non-budgeted that would have been presented to council, and that was from Parks and Rec. So everything that council saw over the 120,000 was budgeted except one contract for Parks and Rec. So therefore, nothing from utilities would not have been seen. So they were all seen. And then I think the other thing to add, sorry, I lost my train of thought. I will let you know if I think about it. Sorry.
I think so again, Chair, and we'll, again, we'll respond to however the board determines we want to. I think the thing what we're doing is this was a council decision that has an effect in terms of the process that the board is already, that the board is a recommender of approval to the council. Council made this change, council approved this change, council agreed with it, evaluated it over the course of several months. So what it means is there's a backwards effect to us, to the Water and Sewer Board in terms of what gets recommended to council, because that's what the charter says. The charter doesn't say what's recommended to city manager or city or utilities director. That would be a change to the Water and Sewer Board charter that now becomes inconsistent with the council direction around these limits, which is, as Councilmember Ward said, 125 is similar to them. That one's just a CPI increase on the existing number, and the 250 is consistent with what's happening in the Front Range. So I just want to make I want to make sure that the board is comfortable recognizing that this isn't a request for a change to anything that we're doing that wasn't already discussed at length over multiple study sessions by the council and agreed ultimately on. This is what the council is comfortable with as an approach, and that's where I just want to make sure that we don't start. We're not asking for an approval on anything. We're informing the effect of that council approved change on this board.
Peter, thank you. That's what I want to say was teasing out with my questions at the beginning about what is changing or not. I am going to suggest we leave it at this. I agree with your presentation that this is the implications of the council decision. I'm going to invite our council members that if you wanted the board, if council would like the board to be looking at budgeted items between 125 and 250, that is certainly something that you could take up with council and move down, but absent having any guidance from council on that way, the implication is as Peter laid out. So I don't believe there's any action from the board needed. I just invite our council member representatives to carry that forward if you care to. Is there any concerns with presenting the issue, concluding the issue this way? Marjan, your hand is still is up, or you have a new issue?
I just was wondering, what does it take to put some cap on that?
Council's direction to do so.
So I think I think the cap, that there were a number of study sessions discussing this over several months to land on these caps based on what makes sense in the Denver market, what are other cities doing, what are other municipalities. There are other municipalities that are at $500,000, and then there are other municipalities that are under this. This is through council's discussion over several months, the results that the council was comfortable with in terms of those caps and the delineation of the difference in those caps between non-budgeted and budgeted, which is the new delineation that didn't exist before as a result of this process. So the caps only change when council decides that they change, which then translates to the effect on this board as it relates to what it recommends to council. If you recall, everything that this board, every action this board takes is a recommendation for council to approve or not approve something. There's not an action that the board takes where it approves something. It's all of our actions are recommending approval by council. So if we're outside the alignment of what the council approval process, that changes the function of this board. And so
I understand what you're saying, Peter, about that. I understand the experience that other cities are going through. It's something that we can certainly look at, but I certainly don't think that because Denver is following that, we should just follow that. Because look at Denver water; it couldn't be any worse than the corruption that is there. So I disagree with the fact that every time that we turn around, Denver is doing that. Well, that's why people move out of Denver and come to Englewood, and that is not something that is valuable, in my opinion. And I could be possibly wrong. But I can see your point, though.
I may have misspoke there because I wasn't saying city of Denver. I was saying metropolitan areas in the other municipalities in the Denver metropolitan area. So not city and county of Denver. There were several other municipalities in the metro area, including Thornton, Greenwood Village, Littleton, Arvada, Centennial, Commerce City, Castle Rock, Broomfield, Lone Tree, Wheat Ridge, and Sheridan that were evaluated when looking at what are the comfortable limits that the council landed on. And that's how they landed on these limits.
I understand your logic. Thank you for explaining.
Thank you.
And I would just like to make a comment. At this point, these are the caps. They cannot go any higher without council deciding. And I don't think this is something that council has moved forward on very often. It just came up, I think, around a year ago. So I'm not in favor of moving it higher at this point. I mean, with the current inflation, I think 250,000 for a budgeted item probably is not unreasonable. If inflation would ever be curtailed, then we may need to look at something again. So I appreciate that.
I'd like to speak briefly about the concern over the potential for abuse or daisy chaining contracts to kind of avoid what would normally be a spending cap. I understand that concern. I just don't think that in this scenario, I have any evidence to support that as a realistic concern. Staff has always been extremely accountable, and we have open books here in the city where you can examine expenditures. Non-budgeted contracts are relatively rare in the city just in general. And especially at this size, I think this is an appropriate size to evaluate a contract at. So I'm comfortable with this change, and I don't think that it opens this huge window for abuse. And if there was abuse, I think it would be caught pretty quickly in an annual audit when we see, oh, well, we approved 17 non-budgeted contracts at $124,000. What are we doing? So I'm comfortable with the change.
And I just
Any
like to add
further
one,
comments before
yeah,
we?
can I add just one more
Sorry,
thing,
go ahead.
Chair? I'm sorry. This does not in any way eliminate the process of we are doing memos for everything that's $5,000 and over of how we made the purchase. And so if there's a question on a $137,000 contract at some point in time, and someone looks at the memo and says, oh, this is how you, well, is that really the right interpretation? Then we have a discussion around that and say, well, actually we'd prefer that they be something that go to, and we'll pivot. We'll make these interpretations based on what we think what the intention of the council was, but that will all be documented in every one of these memos for anything $5,000 and over. So that does not change.
And I'm just going to add on to that. Procurement looks at every single memo that the department does for checks and balances. So procurement is looking for what is that procurement justification? Is it the 2 quotes? How did we get there? Did we follow those processes? And if there is a question, it is brought up to the staff to say, hey, I don't think this is an optimal source. This needs to go out for solicitation. So those discussions are made in procurement before, those purchase orders and the contracts are signed and fully executed.
In fairness, what's different today, a $200,000 purchase does get reviewed by a citizen board and will not after this. That's the implication. Again, I think that's the implication of council's decision, but it's not just the thoroughness of the procurement process. That's the impact of a change here. Is there is a loss of citizen review. That
is
Go ahead.
absolutely true. Yes, with this process, that up to 2,000, there are 250,000 budgeted contracts. There's a change from 100,000 to 250,000. That window between 100,000 and 250 would have come to this board and gone to council. The changes to update the policy, which haven't been updated like many times over the years, is just changing that threshold as you know, times change. So it's the reason why I reiterate the focus on the memo and the rationale is because that's as much for public transparency as it is for the public, us as public officials who are making these purchases. I want to make sure everybody understands exactly why and how we made the purchase, so that if someone has a question, we don't have to try and remember why we did it the way we did it. We can just go back to the memo and say, this is how we did it.
I think we're in a position to wrap up this topic, but anyone want to squeeze anything else in, or can we move on? All right, let's move on. Great discussion, everybody. Thank you. Look ahead schedule was in the agenda. Item H is board member's choice. Is there any other issues an individual board member would like to raise tonight?
Do you want me to? So Chair, this is Sarah Stone. I do have one.
Yes.
We are doing very final testing on one item for the utility billing system. It is scheduled to go live next Wednesday. We have some communication prepared to go out to customers if that is the case, that it does go live next Wednesday. But this has obviously been a challenging implementation of the software, but we are excited that it looks like so far we are very close, and July 17th is the date that we are to go live. So your August bills should be generated from the new system. And then you should also have a customer portal that you can log in and do e-billing, sign up for auto pay, things like that. Anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah,
Okay.
So I would just like that. So what that means is between the 17th or actually this Friday and August 1st there's a potential that online bill pay will not be in place until we get the system completely converted over. So we've notified everyone who is an online bill pay, auto pay, or an auto pay, which there are 600 accounts that use auto pay, that there will be a temporary period where it shuts off, and then that everybody has to reinitiate on the new system. And so that is a bit of an inconvenience, but we're trying to make it as smooth and seamless as possible for people, recognizing that it is a change that is affecting people. We are also experiencing a significant influx of calls in customer service. So Sarah's customer service group is experiencing a tremendous amount of calls because we have 3 things hitting the customer at once right now. So you have the AMI, the Advanced Metering Infrastructure Program, that's underway. So there's been notification to customers about that. And there was a hiccup early on where they had scheduled appointments and the supplier didn't have the right equipment in stock, and they had to reschedule. So we had to sit down with the supplier to make sure that doesn't happen again, so that we make this more smooth for our customers. So you have that. So then we have the billing system, which is going to affect every account, that we will be trying to make it. We're trying to set it up so it's as seamless of a transition over the next few weeks from the old billing system to the new billing system, but there is going to be some changes, and we expect calls. And the third thing is the lead program, which we are We are heavy actively into removing lead programs. So initially, those were supposed to be spaced out over the course of 9 months. The delay in the billing system essentially collected the AMI system, which should have kicked off so the billing system was supposed to go live, a long time ago, but recently it was supposed to go live last fall. Then AMI would have kicked off around January, February timeframe, and then lead service would have kicked off in July. And so we were setting up all those contracts so that they would sequentially hit that way. The problem is we couldn't do AMI until we did the billing system. And with the delays in the billing system, essentially what it did is it collected AMI and moved that one forward. And then we got to a point where AMI, or the supplier, extended it a couple times and said, if you extend it again, it's going to cost the city money. At which point we said, well, we don't want to lose our pricing. We don't want to lose our the cost certainty that we have on that. So we're moving that forward. And so what it essentially means is customers are receiving a whole lot of correspondence from utilities right now on 3 separate things that are going on at the same time. Sarah's staff is doing a tremendous job fielding calls. I talked to one of her billing staff today, and she had fielded over 80 calls today. Yesterday was 65. So we are getting a lot of calls. The challenge is, and the unfortunate thing is, a number of those calls are, and I asked her what percentage are people who are upset versus not upset, and there's a higher significant of she estimated 50% of people were yelling at her, or not yelling at her, but upset with her. Some yelling at her, some being rude, and it's we think it's because there's so much change going on, and it's all of this is initiating right now, and we're in that first steps of initiation where there's going to be some missteps, there's going to be some potential suboptimal approaches to how this goes, but every time we get that, we fix it, and we're tracking customer feedback, both neutral, positive, and negative, so that we can have data as this goes through, as all 3 of these things hit our customers. Fast forward to a year and a half from now, in theory, all of these should be done, and our customers should have a new billing system, new metering system, and no lead service lines in their system. It's all hitting right now. So I just wanted to make sure the board was aware that we are working on it diligently, and that Sarah's staff is spending a lot of time working with customers to try and make it as smooth as possible for customers. If you are hearing anything, please let us know. Please reach out to us directly so that we can get it corrected. We have people immediately contact customers that have problems and usually can get it rectified and corrected. We're in a period of change right now. Did I miss anything? Okay. Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to add that to this discussion. I guess are there any questions?
Any questions people want to squeeze in before I say we're adjourned? Hearing none. All right, no, seriously, thank you, Peter. We are adjourned. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Sarah, for all your hard work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.